There is no guidebook to instruct parents on how to explain the enormity of what happened on 9/11. Parents worry that they might say too much or that they might not say enough. And that is why we are joined today by our parenting expert, Dr. Sheryl Ziegler. So we always know it's age appropriate, but we should talk about it, right? Acknowledge the day.
Absolutely. So here's what you can equate it to. When we were kids, there was some sort of historical event, right? The bombing of Pearl Harbor or something. Sure. These stories that got passed down. And I think for parents in the generation where we were kids or young adults when this happened, it's still very real for us. But for our kids, it's a piece of history, really. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like it feels very far away for them, although it might not for us. So keeping that in context, I think allows people to talk about it more because it is not something that necessarily happened last year that feels like it could affect them. That will just sound like, wow, a long time ago, this is what happened. So first, keep that in mind and keep this conversation going. There's a bigger picture to why we want to keep it going.
I get the feeling the best thing would be is if your kids came to you with questions. But if they don't, you have to start the discussion. How do you go about starting a discussion? And obviously it's different with an 8-year-old and with a 13-year-old and a 20-year-old.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just use myself. Honestly, this morning I just said, hey, do you know what today is? Today's September 11th. Do you know what that means? My kids were like, yeah. And, you know, and there was a little silence and I said, well, today we should, you know, pay respect and think about that day. It's really important. Let's see what happens at school. Let's see what teachers are talking about. I don't know. And, you know, that probably varies. Are teachers talking about it? Maybe, maybe not. And then tonight for me, I'll bring it back up and just really commemorate for me having a child and working with kids on what we can do. What can a little kid do about 9/11? And I think it's really the spirit of acceptance and tolerance and love and peace. And it just gives us yet another opportunity to say, this was a crime of hate. This was a terrorist act of enormous hatred and lack of understanding of one another. If you want to keep it simple for kids, I think we can take politics out of it and just basically say, this was an act of ugliness and hate, and how can we be the light? And so I think that's what today can be an opportunity, you know, 23 years later.
Yeah, I mean,
22 years later.
Our college kids don't remember that day now.
Right.
You know, I mean,
right.
That's how many years it's been.
Yes.
But to bring that up, when you talk about that, I think of you growing up in New York. Sometimes you feel far away when you're like in Denver. I mean, if you get the chance to go to New York City, you should stop at the memorial and things like that. But to really comprehend it, you know, to how big it was and process it.
Yeah, and I think that does depend on your kid. How much do you want them to understand? But I think, you know, it was the greatest terrorist act on our soil of all time. I think that's something worthy of noting. And remembering, and then personalizing it, you know, and just saying it was just one of those acts of terror. And I'm from New York, so it definitely hit me, you know, probably maybe in a different way, but you know, where there were so many different types of people that were affected by this, and firefighters and moms and dads and kids. There was a school there. I mean, there was so much that was there, and so I think just, you know, again, what did we all have in common? How did that bring our country together? And how really today we're still involved in a lot of what happened from then is still affecting us today, politically, around the world. And depending on your kid, you might want to get into
airport security.
Airport security, simply put.
But in your line of work, closure is an important thing. And I've always struggled with closure. I'm not sure you always need closure. I just think sometimes you just deal with what you deal with.
Yep.
But when you grow up and you talk to people who experienced Pearl Harbor, it's now so far in the past that it's basically a fixed piece of history. Certainly there's still stories, the Kennedy assassination.
Yes.
And 9/11 though, you know, and that is part of it. The people of our generation, people, you know, younger than I, you know, is it closed to you? Because I think you have to deal with it yourself a bit before you talk about it with your kids.
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, you know, where were you when JFK got shot? I felt like that was a question that you heard like from the older people talking when we were kids. There's always going to be probably something that marks a generation. I just think this was one of those markings of generations. Sure. And even though maybe there's not closure, you can even talk to your kids about how it impacted you.
Yep.
Right. Yeah. And they can get from that and learn from that and see how did we process it. So I think there's a lot to gain from it. And it's very important to always remember this day. We said we'd never forget, so we can never forget.
Yeah. Certainly plenty to talk about. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Sheryl Ziegler.